I hadn't been home in nearly 8 years. Not for the holidays. Not for weddings. Not even for the last family emergency. I wasn't angry. I just didn't belong anymore. And frankly, they made it clear they were better off pretending I didn't exist. Still, when the call came that Camille was gone, I booked the flight. No hesitation. I wasn't coming back for her. I was coming back because I needed to see it with my own eyes. That she was really gone. That the chapter was really closed. The town looked the same. Same cracked pavement on Main Street. Same diner with the burnt coffee. Same church. St. Mary's. The one with the fake stained glass and the smell of old polish and forgotten grief. The same church where we buried our father. And our mother. And now her. I wore my uniform. Not as a statement, just out of habit. It was pressed, clean regulation. I kept my ribbons modest. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I've never cared much for applause. But the moment I stepped onto the front steps of a church, all eyes turned. I heard someone whisper behind me, "That's the sister, the one who went off and played soldier while Camille built the town." Camille. Even in death, she still had them on a leash. I scanned the crowd. Local politicians, church elders, people in tailored black. It felt more like a press conference than a funeral. And there she was. In framed photographs, flower displays, slideshow screens, smiling, polished, sainted. The last time I saw her in person was 6 years ago. At our father's funeral. She wore the same expression then, compassion, grief, benevolence, but it was all performance. I remember standing near the front, saying nothing, when she turned and raised her voice just enough for everyone to hear. "Well, look who finally made it. The useless soldier found time to come home." They laughed. Some nervously. Some meanly. Most just watched me with that look, the one people give when they're not sure if they should pity you or step away.
I didn't respond then.
Just stood still, hands clasped in front of me, face neutral. That was the first time I realized Camille didn't just resent me, she wanted to erase me. And, in that moment, she almost did. But now she was gone. And they were still smiling for her. I sat in the last row. Didn't need to be seen.
Didn't want to be.
I listened as her best friend spoke about Camille's boundless generosity, her service to the community, her unshakable moral compass. The choir sang. The pastor praised her legacy. And then came the eulogy. Pre-written. Probably rehearsed. Probably ghost-written. All about how Camille lifted others while her sister ran away. A few people even looked back at me as the words landed, like they were checking to see if I was taking notes. I wasn't. I'd heard it all before. When the service ended, the crowd spilled into the cemetery like a gala had just let out. People hugged, exchanged cards, made lunch plans. I stood off to the side, not crying, not angry, just waiting for it to be over. That's when a man I didn't recognize approached me. Older. Weathered. Former military. I could tell by the posture. He didn't say much. Just leaned in, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Your sister wasn't who you thought she was. If you're here now, maybe it's time someone told you the truth." Then he walked away. I didn't chase him. I didn't ask for his name. I just stood there, blinking, the words echoing in my mind. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. A mission. I didn't come home for Camille. But maybe Camille had something left to show me. The lawyer's office was too clean. Glass-topped desk. Leather chairs no one ever really sat in. The kind of place where everything looked expensive but felt fake. He didn't even offer condolences. Just handed me a folder and said, "Your sister's estate has already been transferred to the designated trustees." I blinked. Trustees. He nodded.
Yes.
Valor House appointed legal custodians for all remaining assets, per her updated will. There was no family listed? I asked. No, he hesitated. You were not mentioned. I wasn't surprised. Camille never did like sharing. Still, it didn't make sense. She had no spouse. No children. Barely trusted her own assistants. She once fired a secretary for misplacing a planner. And now she was trusting trustees? I didn't argue. I just signed the visitor sheet and left. But something about it itched. Camille didn't give things away. She controlled them. If she didn't want me to inherit anything, that was one thing. But to leave everything to faceless legal handlers? That wasn't like her. I drove to her house. The one she kept out by Westwood Lake. It was quiet, just like she liked it, gated, ivy-wrapped, too perfect. The power had already been shut off, and the place had the sterile silence of a museum. Like grief hadn't touched anything. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Her study was untouched. Everything arranged precisely. Color-coded binders. A glass paperweight shaped like an eagle. Even her framed childhood photos had been dusted recently. And that's when I saw it. A photo of us. From when we were kids. Me in a plastic soldier helmet, her in a tiara. I don't know why I picked it up. Habit maybe. But when I did, it rattled. Inside the frame, taped to the back of the cardboard insert, was a small brass key.
Old. Smooth.
Familiar. I stared at it. Then at the shelf beside me. Camille had a second property. A cottage. One she never talked about publicly. Just an old family place she'd quietly renovated, never sold. She kept it off the books, off the grid, and as far as I knew, empty. So I went. It was still there, tucked behind pine trees and overgrown brush. The key fit the door like it had never left. Inside, it smelled like dust and lavender and old intentions. Furniture covered in sheets. Nothing disturbed. Except in the back room, I found a bookcase that was just slightly misaligned. I tugged it away from the wall, and there it was. A small wall safe, scratched from use. I tried the key. It clicked. Inside were three things. A flash drive, a stack of folded documents, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. The letter was short. Not a confession. Not an apology. Just a storm in handwriting. Maddie, if you're reading this, then I didn't get out. I made a mess. Bigger than I understood. Bigger than I could control. I lied to everyone, including myself. They let me build something beautiful, but it wasn't real. If they find out you have this, they'll come after you too. I'm sorry. Or maybe I'm not. I don't know anymore.
C.
No signature. Just the first initial, like she was afraid of writing her own name. I didn't shake. I didn't panic. I just folded the letter and put it in my pocket. And then I turned to the flash drive. Back at the motel, I plugged it into my laptop, fully expecting it to be encrypted. But it wasn't. Just a clean folder tree. Labeled with names like Q3 donations reconciled, silent contributors, rehab center funding, gala invoices modified, and the one that stopped me, backup_ledger_private. I opened that last one. Rows and rows of transactions. Non-profit accounts connected to offshore entities. Payments listed as equipment donations that never existed. Gala fundraisers that brought in double the reported amount. Expenses marked for services never rendered. Camille hadn't just made a mess. She'd built a fraud empire. And she hid it behind flags and photo ops and wounded veterans. It wasn't an accident. It was architecture. I sat back in the motel chair, the letter still in my pocket, the key still in my hand. And I realized something that chilled me deeper than anything I'd seen in combat. My sister didn't just take her secrets to the grave. She left them for me to find. And now that I had, there was no unseeing the truth. When I was in the military, we were trained to spot inconsistencies, small gaps between what people said and what reality showed. A uniform worn slightly wrong. A route that didn't match the patrol order. A face that smiled too easily in the middle of a hostile crowd. That instinct came rushing back the deeper I went into Camille's files. The first thing I noticed was how clean everything looked. Too clean. Every folder on that flash drive was perfectly named. Organized. Sanitized. Most people don't keep financials that neatly unless they know someone will look. Unless they're hiding something in plain sight. The donation records were the first red flag. Camille's public charities, Valor House, Healing First, Legacy Horizon, they all boasted massive fundraising efforts. The numbers looked great on paper. Too great. I picked one gala at random, The Valor Gala 2021. Publicly, it raised $180,000. But on the internal record, $423,000. Over double. Not just a rounding error. Not a mistake. A system. Then came the vendor logs. Listed expenses for things that never existed. A $12,000 charge to mobile therapy units. No address. No delivery notes. And the vendor? A shell company, one that had no website, no staff, no public presence. Just a name on paper and a P.O. box in Nevada. That was the moment I knew Camille hadn't just skimmed from the top. She'd engineered the whole thing. She built charities that didn't serve. Clinics that never opened. Outreach programs with no recipients. She gave speeches about wounded veterans while rerouting money meant for their care. And everyone loved her for it. Back in town, I started walking the places she'd once ruled. The mural downtown. The scholarship plaques in the high school. The Valor House community kitchen. People still talked about her like a saint. She built this town. One man told me at a diner counter. Brought jobs, attention, dignity. I nodded. Didn't say much. Just sipped the coffee and kept listening. But inside, I was seeing the cracks. Because behind every honor, every framed certificate, every thank you banner, there were missing numbers. Inflated stats. And empty promises. I pulled the public grant records from City Hall, quietly, after hours, through someone who still owed my father a favor. I compared Camille's filings to state disbursement logs. They didn't match. Time after time, there were gaps. A $50,000 grant listed for therapeutic equipment appeared in her report, but the state listed it as general operations. Another flagged emergency shelter build-out had no matching permit, no blueprint, no contractors on file. It was all fiction. Polished, believable fiction. But fiction. I knew I couldn't pull this thread alone. I needed outside perspectives, people who had worked for her, people who might have seen more, but never dared to speak. So I made a list of former volunteers and staff members from Valor House. Some had moved. Others pretended not to remember me. A few even hung up when I called. But one agreed to meet. Quietly. Late afternoon. Outside town. She didn't want to be named. Didn't want to be seen. But she sat across from me in the back of a quiet sandwich shop and didn't look away. I always knew something was off, she said. Camille had that perfect smile. You know? The one that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. But when you left the room, you were nothing. I asked about the finances. She nodded slowly. I handled incoming donations for about 2 years. I noticed amounts being changed in the system. Some doubled.
Some split into different accounts.
When I asked her about it, she smiled and said it was just internal bookkeeping. Nothing to worry about. She looked over her shoulder. You can't trust what's on the surface, she said. She made people feel good so they wouldn't ask questions. And if someone did, she trailed off. What happened? I asked. Ask about Officer Dale, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Then she stood up, tossed a few bills on the table, and walked out. Officer Dale. The name triggered something. He used to be a local police officer, handled security for Camille's events. Clean record. Respected. And then, out of nowhere, he retired early. Moved out of state. No goodbyes. No farewell party. Just gone. I looked him up. His address was a few towns over now. I didn't go visit him. Not yet. But I did pull his last public duty log. His final assignment? A fundraiser at Valor House. 3 days later, he filed a private incident report. The contents were sealed. Of course they were. Camille didn't just control money. She controlled silence. I spoke to a few more former volunteers, some willing, some careful. One woman told me Camille's rehab program photos were staged. They dressed up empty rooms, brought in real veterans, shot testimonials, then sent them home without ever enrolling them. Another man, who used to handle supply runs, said half the shipments they signed for never arrived. The receipts were always there. The boxes weren't. Sometimes we'd list 40 walkers or lifts or medical beds, he told me. We'd get maybe 5. The rest? Disappeared. But the donors didn't know that. They just saw the newsletter. The newsletter. The goddamn newsletter. Printed monthly, mailed to thousands of donors. Photos of Camille cutting ribbons, shaking hands with senators, hugging elderly vets. I pulled a few issues from a storage closet in her office. I cross-referenced the photos with the file metadata on the flash drive. Some of those veterans were used in multiple campaigns. One man's face was photoshopped into 3 different cities, 3 different clinics, 3 different fake stories. And still, she kept smiling. The flash drive had one more folder I hadn't opened yet. It was labeled, simply, D. Inside, a single Word doc. No formatting. No headers. Just a name, Dale. And then lines of notes, copied messages, flagged texts, screenshots.
Camille had known.
She'd seen Dale get close. And she'd neutralized him. Not with violence. With pressure. He was offered an off-record settlement from Valor House for security disputes. Then a sudden pension adjustment from the city. Then a non-disclosure agreement.
Then silence.
I sat back in my motel chair, the glow of the screen pulsing against the dark. This wasn't a scam. It was a machine. Camille didn't steal for greed. She stole for control. She built a persona so bulletproof, no one questioned her. Not the town. Not the media. Not the donors. And definitely not me, not until it was too late. She once mocked me for leaving. Said I abandoned the family. Said I ran. But the truth? I think she was always afraid of what I might come back and find. And now I had. The documents. The receipts. The back doors. The secrets. The woman they buried wasn't the one they eulogized. The woman they cried for wasn't the one who built their town. She was something else entirely. And whatever was left of her empire, it was about to crumble. Because I wasn't leaving. Not yet. Truth doesn't scream. It doesn't come kicking down doors. It waits. It waits for the silence. For the moment when everyone's looking the other way. And then, only then does it show its face. That's what I saw in Camille's files. Not just evidence. Not just fraud. Not just evidence. Not just fraud. A pattern. A blueprint. Something bigger than one woman with a fake smile and a stolen cause. Camille didn't just manipulate numbers. She manipulated lives. And I couldn't walk away now, not when I knew what she'd buried. There was one final address left on that flash drive. A rental property. Quiet corner of town, on the edge of a zoning line, tucked behind a warehouse row most people ignored. No signage. No records in her nonprofit brochures. No online footprint. But rent had been paid, prepaid for 12 months, by one of her shell accounts. When I got there, the place was dark. No mail. No cars. The door had 2 locks. One was key-based. The other was digital. I tried her birthday.
Denied.
I tried Dad's Navy ID. Denied again. Then I remembered. Camille once told me that no one would ever guess the number she used for everything because it wasn't about her. It was about control. So I tried the first 4 digits of Dad's old VA claim number.
Beep. Click.
Unlocked. Inside, the air was cold and untouched. No furniture except a single folding table, a cot in the corner, and a locked file cabinet against the wall. I opened the cabinet. Inside were documents, thick, printed, hand-marked. Financial flows, vendor contracts, offshore routing instructions. Half were circled. Others were annotated in my father's handwriting. He had found this. All of it. The fraud, the shell donors, the misappropriated funds. He had traced the pattern himself. And Camille, she'd known he did. There was a photo pinned to the back wall. A small black and white image of the 2 of them, Camille and Dad, standing in front of a Valor House ribbon-cutting ceremony. Her smile was perfect. His looked forced. Below it, a post-it note in Dad's handwriting. She used my name to sell a lie. I found another document. Dad's death certificate. But something was off. I remembered the one Camille had emailed to the family after the funeral. I pulled it up on my phone. Compared the 2. Dates didn't match. Certifying physician didn't match. One showed morphine levels consistent with end-of-life care. The other showed a dose too high for standard pain treatment. A dose that could shut down a man's lungs. There was no mistake here. She forged the document. I knew what that meant. And it meant she didn't just let him die. She made sure he did. The nurse who'd signed off on his vitals? Her name was nowhere in the system. Scrubbed.
Gone.
I eventually found her through a back-channel search. Working private care now, under a different name. I called her. Told her who I was. There was a long pause. Then she said, "I can't talk. Please don't call again." I said, "Did Camille administer the final injection?" The line went quiet. Then, she stayed after the shift ended. Said she wanted a moment alone. I came back, and he was already gone. That was all I needed.
She didn't just bury Dad.
She buried the evidence. And now I understood why she left me nothing. She was trying to protect the story. But stories don't hold forever. Not when you're dragging skeletons out from behind award plaques. And not when I was just getting started. I compiled everything. The flash drive files, the fake invoices, the blacked out emails, the forged documents. Then I did the one thing she never saw coming. I gave her a tribute.
Public. Loud.
Controlled. I sent invitations to her top donors. Her political allies.
Her board.
Local news. Memorial dedication. In honor of Camille Rowe. Everyone showed up. People wore suits.
Gave speeches. Said all the right things.
I sat in the back. Plain clothes. Ribbon bar hidden. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium with one file in hand. I looked out at the crowd. "You knew my sister as a leader," I began. "As a voice for the wounded, the underserved, the forgotten. But that's not who she was." The crowd shifted. Uneasy. She stole from veterans. She created charities that didn't exist. She forged our father's death certificate. She used her image to hide her greed, and you all helped her do it.
Gasps.
Someone called it slander. I opened the file. Displayed the documents on the projector. The fake routing sheets. The payments to non-existent rehab centers. The nurse's written testimony. The altered death certificate. Each one clicked into place like a weapon cocking. By the time I finished, half the room was frozen. The other half had already slipped out the side door. That night, the story hit local news. By morning, it was national. Valor House founder implicated in massive fraud scandal. Donations seized. Accounts frozen. Political endorsements pulled. Investigations launched. One by one, the people who once cheered for her tried to pretend they never knew her. The mayor resigned. 3 board members went silent. A 4th was arrested for obstruction. Her legacy crumbled faster than I expected. And I stayed quiet. There was no victory speech. No press conference. Just the weight of truth sitting beside me like an old friend who never speaks, but never leaves. A few weeks later, I visited her grave. No one had placed flowers. I didn't either. Just stood there for a long moment. Not out of hatred. Not even out of grief.
But because the story had to end.
And someone had to say it out loud. She called me a useless soldier, I whispered. But I was never fighting her. I was fighting for the truth. I left without looking back. Back at base, my new assignment was desk duty. Non-operational. The quiet punishment they give you when you do the right thing, but make the wrong people look bad.
Didn't matter.
Camille was gone. But the truth? It was still standing. I keep one thing from all this. One photo. Us as kids. Her in a paper crown. Me in a plastic helmet. That was before it all went wrong. Before the applause. Before the lies. Some truths don't set you free. They anchor you. But anchors keep you steady. And that's all I ever wanted. You've just heard a story about betrayal, silence, and the cost of doing what's right. If this hit you, if you felt that moment of rage, of recognition, of quiet justice, then don't just sit with it. Subscribe, share this video. Comment below. What would you have done in my place? Would you stay silent? Or would you stand up, even if no one claps for you? And if you've ever been underestimated, If you've ever been told you're useless or too quiet, just remember, some of us weren't built for the spotlight. We were built to carry. And sometimes, carrying the truth is the heaviest and bravest thing you can do. Subscribe if you want more real stories that go beyond the surface. Turn on notifications. Because we're not done. Not by a long shot.